blockchain collective are making decisions about how to approach the future, how to implement changes, things like that. And our working group has about 200 members right now, so a good deal of members. We have probably about 60 very active members, so those are members that show up to our regular monthly meetings. And underneath our working group, we have a couple of sub-initiatives as well.
Yeah, that's perfect. So we'll start our session now. Just a minute.
Awesome.
Yeah.
So welcome to the final session for today. We have with us Kirsten, Managing Director of Coalitions Consulting, a go-to-market consultancy helping blockchain teams develop the human components of DLT systems. She serves as Vice Chair of the IEEE P2145 Working Group on Blockchain Governance Standards and consults enterprises on DLT governance design alongside strong blockchain consulting. She is an enthusiastic speaker and has spoken at and hosted dozens of public forums, educational events, and webinars on topics including the impacts of regulation on software innovation and entrepreneurship. She's joining from US at the late hours. I know that it is indeed challenging, but it's really great that you have robbed in to be part of this program. And Kirsten, we are delighted and excited to have you in our midst. Welcome. I invite you to take lead from here on. The screen is all yours.
Thank you so much, Jacob. So first of all, I wanted to give a shout out and a thank you to Robin Roy Thomas, a student at Saintgits University. He is the one who notified me of this wonderful event. He told me about the first blockchain educational summit that you hosted a number of months ago and how engaging it was. And he thought that he wanted to loop me in for the next summit. So very happy to be here. Huge shout out to Robin. Thank you for all of your work in P2145. Robin's been interning for us for the past 3 months or so. So I'll get started. So stakeholder engagement and enterprise blockchain systems. This is what we're going to be discussing today. And this is a topic that I'm very passionate about because I think that it's not discussed enough. You always have a lot of writing, a lot of research, a lot of discussions being held related to technical applications of blockchain, which is fantastic. But blockchain is a very new technology, and it's a unique technology that takes something that a lot of other enterprise technologies don't really experience. And one of those things is the fact that blockchain technology is multi-stakeholder. Blockchain technology takes building a coalition around a system, not just building technology. So that's what we're going to be talking about today. So there are a couple of topics that I'm going to cover today underneath that broader topic. So the first two topics, blockchains as collectives and scalability and buy-in, with regard to stakeholders, are going to be talking about the why of stakeholder relations, the why of governance. And the last two are going to talk a little bit about the how. So how do you go about analyzing the stakeholders in a blockchain system? Say you're designing a blockchain system or researching a blockchain system. And then looking at just takeaways for uniting stakeholders under one roof to launch a blockchain or DLT system. So I would give you an intro about me, but Jacob already gave me such a fantastic intro, so I don't know if I could top that. He covered everything pretty well. Coalitions Consulting, we consult blockchain companies on the human aspect of blockchain, so that's governance, coalition building, stakeholder alignment, things of that nature. IEEE P2145 Working Group on Blockchain Standards. What we're doing is producing standards for blockchain governance. So these are not as technical as many of the IEEE standards out there. A lot of them are more information-based in nature. So what we're trying to do is put out a breadth of information on different varieties of governance models, different ways of structuring the governance of blockchain systems, so that groups that are creating their blockchain and DLT systems have a reference base, because right now that's not really there. So it's a little bit about those two organizations. Work with each of them takes up most of my time. So let's jump into topic one, blockchains as collectives. So all blockchains are collectives. I hit on this a little bit earlier, but I'm gonna reiterate. Blockchain technology is fundamentally different than a lot of other technologies that we've seen used in enterprises, that we've seen used in consumer-facing technology. And that's because for blockchain technology to see, or for companies to see the full benefit of blockchain technologies, it needs to be multi-stakeholder. You have to have multiple stakeholders coming in and contributing to that joint single source of truth. Because without the multiple stakeholders, you kind of lose the single source of truth. So this is why we're seeing everything from super public permissionless Ethereum type networks to blockchain consortia that are a group of 4, 5, 6, 100 companies that are coming together to maintain a blockchain system. So for the purposes of this discussion, we're going to be focusing mostly on the enterprise type blockchain networks. I figured since most of you all are going to be dabbling in, this is a career, it's very good to get a picture of what companies are building right now. And even though public permissioned, like open source networks are fantastic, and projects like Hyperledger are leveraging some of the components of public permission networks to make it more suitable for enterprise. A lot of enterprises are nonetheless having these networks where it's just a couple company stakeholders coming together to maintain a blockchain, as opposed to a bunch of different people all over the world who are able to contribute and engage in these blockchain systems. So either way, both of these types of blockchain networks are collectives. They are multi-stakeholder. Why is this important, though? You might be asking yourself. So stakeholder buy-in is essential if you're going to scale. Why is that? So if you're building a traditional software, one of the things that you don't really come across is having to rally a bunch of stakeholders in one room, get them to agree to things, and have that be a smooth process. That's where governance comes in. So for example, if you have a blockchain consortium that we're looking at, the governance would involve all of the different parties of the consortium coming together and voting for things like an elected board. So this is a very corporate model of handling things. They might be directly voting on different issues, on different bug fixes. They might be jointly opting to contribute to a development fund of some nature. So these are all components of governance. So in addition to governance, which is the, we'll say, codified and non-codified processes for decision-making within a blockchain, you also need to have co-creation. So you need to have companies, entities, whoever the stakeholders are in your ecosystem coming together to design, to build, and hopefully launch whatever blockchain system we're dealing with. And if you have good governance, and if your stakeholders are co-creating, then you have stakeholder buy-in, because through co-creation and through believing they have a say in governance, they find a further commitment in maintaining the system. And it's more apparent to them that they are going to be having their voice heard, and that they can help progress the system into something that's always valuable for their company. So, section 2, stakeholder buy-in and scalability. I attest that blockchain systems cannot scale without stakeholder buy-in. Some people might disagree with me, as a lot of blockchain platforms start out, with a single founder, a group of co-founders trying to, do it all on their own. And that's great. Things can work like that, but it's really best to try to get your stakeholders involved as soon as possible. And one great example of why this is Maersk. So I don't know how many of you are familiar with Maersk, but it's one of the largest international shipping, supply chain, logistics companies. They have literally tens of thousands of partners all over the world that they're engaging with on a daily basis. And up until recently, a lot of their processes were still manual, making it a really fantastic use case for blockchain technology. So in 2017, Maersk and IBM unveiled that they were creating this cross-border supply chain solution built with blockchain technology. And it was going to have the best tech, and it was something that was very, very well funded, very well publicized. And what they did is they went ahead and they built this solution, and then they brought it to a few of Maersk's key partners, key people that they work with on a day-to-day basis, who they wanted to have putting transactions on the blockchain system. And unfortunately, it wasn't really picking up. The people who they were trying to pitch to were a little bit curious why Maersk didn't involve them earlier. They were worried that Maersk maybe built in some sort of comparative advantage for Maersk, and that's reasonable to believe, considering, they're a competitor, you've never engaged in something like this before. So they were a bit leery. They weren't quite happy with the governance model that Maersk had laid out. They wanted more control over things like node hosting and voting on the future of the system. So all of these qualms led Maersk and IBM to decide to go a slightly different route. They decided to scrap the first project and rebuild only with the stakeholders at the table. So what they did is they gathered all the stakeholders and they designed some new governance, and they worked together to design this new system. And that was extremely effective for them. So now I'll give you some numbers. So 4 out of 5 of the world's largest port companies are members of Maersk TradeLens, which is the name of this project, this blockchain system. They have over 150 members and over 10 government agencies that are members. So by all means, this is a really, really, really successful project. I was trying to find some statistics on the quantity of trade or quantity of money that goes to the platform. I wasn't finding any in my brief research preparing for this, but it's a lot. So if anyone can find that number, please do share. So the Maersk example is really illustrative of needing to bring in stakeholders as early as possible. So this is a very, very high-level diagram on how many blockchain systems these days are designed and launched. You design, build, launch, and then you work to onboard your member companies later. So if we're looking at a blockchain consortium, you might have a specific founding company that decides that they want to initiate the creation of this consortium to maintain a shared blockchain network. So they might go about designing this network, they might go about building this network, launching it, and then going to try and onboard as many partners as possible, as many member companies as possible. I believe that we should be designing more like this. So right in the beginning, you have the card that says rally the stakeholders. So that's identifying, understanding the needs of, and starting to work together with the stakeholders that you eventually plan on having part of your blockchain network. So we'll talk about hypothetical logistics consortium that I'm going to be mentioning later on in the presentation. They might want to, as soon as they, confirm that this is something that they want to engage in, heck, even when they're doing market research, they should be reaching out to prospective members of this consortium, competitors of theirs, just different players in the supply chain ecosystem, and seeing, okay, well, what are your worries here? What do you want to see in such a consortium? Do you have a need for this? Things of that nature. And then once you've started to rally the stakeholders, you might only get a few, but even a few is better than none. You want to co-design. So you want to, go about the design and build and launch process of your blockchain, but you want to try and integrate these stakeholders and prospective stakeholders in that process. And then lastly, you go on to onboard new members. So I recognize that it can be very difficult to approach partner companies before you say have something built. It can be difficult to bring together an advisory group of competitors in one room. But these are the things that blockchains are made of. You kind of have to. So when you're designing blockchain systems, definitely don't neglect getting the stakeholders involved at every point. Blockchain systems cannot scale without stakeholder buy-in. So you have to understand the stakeholders' needs and concerns and involve them in early design processes if possible. So that was our introduction to why this whole stakeholder thing matters, why you need to be asking people about their feelings when you're building blockchain and DLT systems. And now we're going to talk a little bit about the how. So how do we go about conducting a stakeholder analysis? And how do we ensure that our stakeholders are going to feel a commitment if it's the right fit, of course. So we're going to work with a scenario. As I mentioned before, we have Blockchain Logistics Inc. We'll say they're in the land freight industry, so not shipping, land freight. They're a consortium blockchain, and they're being started by only one company that intends to grow this consortium industry-wide. So we'll say the stage of this consortium is just, very early. It is not quite in POC currently. They don't have much of the tech built, but they do have funding. They know that they want to progress with this project. And like I said, currently they just have the one stakeholder in the network. So we'll come back to this and reference this a couple times throughout the next couple slides. So first step to stakeholder analysis is identifying your stakeholders. Sounds easy, but it actually isn't for a lot of people. So there are a lot more stakeholders for most consortium blockchains than you would imagine. And this diagram is a very helpful way of putting them on paper. So let me explain the diagram first. So this, I guess, hexagon or some other geometric form over here refers to actors. So actors affect governance decisions. And then this over here refers to members. Members are affected by governance decisions. So you have some entities in your consortium that are going to be both actors and members. So they both affect governance decisions and are affected by governance decisions. You're in all likelihood going to have some actors that are not stakeholders. So some actors that are not affected by governance decisions. And then you're also likely going to have Betroffenen. So this is a super German word that originated in the Wharton Crypto Governance workshop that took place a few years ago. So Betroffenen means, loosely translated, those that are trodden on, something like that. And it means people who are affected by a situation without the ability to impact that situation. So they're affected by governance decisions, but they don't have the ability to influence governance decisions. So for our hypothetical logistics consortium, we'll start to fill this out as an example to give you a feeling of how to use this diagram. So your stakeholders, going to be pretty easy. It's likely going to be other companies. So you might have company A here, company B here, company C here. These are going to be the members of your blockchain consortium. These are going to be groups that are voting on the future of the blockchain consortium. And these are going to be your primary stakeholders, or rather your primary actors, since this is an actor map overall. So over here, you'll have a couple other actors in all likelihood that are not going to be stakeholders. So groups that are going to affect governance decisions without actually voting. How does that happen? So regulators are a great example of this. Regulators can affect a company, can affect a consortium without voting on anything within the consortium. So if a regulator in, we'll say Bahamas, decides to write a new piece of regulation, it's up to the stakeholders in this consortium to become compliant with that regulation. So the regulator is in fact affecting the governance and affecting the operations of this consortium here. You might also have something like an advisory group. So an advisory group is a group that is, potentially future consortium members or other investors. And this group is not necessarily a voting member of the consortium, but it's a group that nonetheless has input on the actions of the consortium. So members, on the other hand, are oftentimes groups that are related to the stakeholders of a consortium. So for example, this is a major land freight provider. They might have a couple of groups that they do business with on a monthly basis. Those groups are in some way impacted by the operations of the consortium through their relationship with this company, but they don't really get any decision making relating to the consortium. So if we were talking about a, say, banking consortium or a like fintech project, something that had like customers as opposed to other member companies. I guess this example has customers too, but the customers are oftentimes over here as well. So like I said, super useful chart. And after you identify your stakeholders, you need to start figuring out, okay, what do they like? What do they need? What industry norms are they, used to upholding? What other factors impact their day-to-day operations? So in order to really get that information, you have to go out and talk to people. You have to go out and send cold emails and get introductions and all that jazz. And once you have that line of contact, with these prospective member companies, and once you start building that relationship, you need to learn more and more about them. So a couple good ways of doing this are creating an advisory group, as I talked about earlier. So advisory groups are great because they can bring in prospective members of the consortium before they're ready to commit. as kind of like a trial run of the consortium. Hey, you can give us some guidance and we could provide you with more information on our group. And you can decide whether or not it's something for you. And in that process, you can be conducting stakeholder interviews. So these are just asking a slew of questions to your stakeholders to really get a feel of how they're interested in engaging with the consortium, what their fears are, what their risk tolerance is, et cetera. If you just can't get a hold of any stakeholders, you can conduct market research and have this supplement your understanding of different stakeholders. It can also be good to talk to people who are in the industries that you're trying to reach to determine what kinds of things are at play in the various stakeholders, companies, what kind of decision-making dynamics and stuff like that. But optimally, you'll be actually talking with representatives of these prospective stakeholders. So market research can be useful, but don't rely on it alone. And then lastly, we recommend creating profiles on your stakeholders. So these are similar to customer profiles in marketing and can provide you a really easy reference piece for each of your stakeholders once created. Know your stakeholders. Anticipate their needs and build your system accordingly. So as we move over to the final session, I wanted to give a brief note on Q&A. So after this section, I'm happy to go back to any previous slides. I know I've been through this a little bit quickly, so feel free to generate questions and hold them to the end. So takeaways on uniting stakeholders. We're going to go over a couple of really important points. If you take away anything from this discussion, please take away these things as you're building out your blockchain systems. So first, understand blockchain systems as a collaborative effort. Blockchains are not normal enterprise tech. You can't treat the build process in a way that's like completely similar to prior technologies. You really need to understand them as building a collective, building something that is very, very collaborative. Seek and involve early adopters as early as possible. So every project is going to have, if you're thinking about that adoption lifecycle, technology adoption lifecycle, for those that are familiar with that, you have your early adopters, or rather your innovators first. They're like super gung-ho about the project and they're going to sign up on day one just because it's innovative and they want to be the innovative company. And then you're going to have your early adopters that are, maybe a little bit leery at first, but once you pitch them the value proposition, they're like, yeah, that's a good sell. And then you have your late adopters and your, laggards who are only going to adopt once everyone else in their industry is adopting. And you're going to have to really identify those innovators and early adopters and bring them in to, like I said, the collaborative effort as soon as possible. Your laggards, it's useful to have an impression of, how they're going to be interacting with the consortium, but it's going to be very difficult to get them to buy in early. So involve stakeholders in design and development. This is super essential. This is just in general a good practice if you're building software, but I know it's something that we can still struggle with at times. I know I've struggled with this at times. So really be intentional about talking to your customer, talk to the stakeholders who are going to be engaging with the consortium and really get them involved, or at least provide very regular updates and solicit feedback on design and development of the consortium. And then don't build governance without your stakeholders in the room. So this is a big mistake of a lot of blockchain companies that are just starting out. They'll go out and lay out a super comprehensive, innovative governance plan, but since they don't have the stakeholders in the room, just the fact that they don't have the other stakeholders in the room turns off the other stakeholders. So you want to really make sure that you're bringing in your stakeholders, even if you already have, a well fleshed out idea of what your governance should look like. You still want to be bringing in the stakeholders and getting their feedback on it, and making sure that if they have any sort of hesitation related to the governance, that you address that. And finally, work with stakeholders to discover and mitigate risks. So this is a big one. In multi-stakeholder ventures, there are lots of different risks. Even just with working with a new technology, there are lots of risks. And when we're talking to these member companies, it's very valuable to be open with them about trying to identify risks and soliciting their help identifying risks, and then working together as a group to come up with solutions to those risks. So a lot of the solutions to risks in blockchain consortium are things like legal protections, IP ownership that's very clearly stated, good governance processes, things of that nature. And lastly, committed stakeholders build strong blockchains. So as I mentioned earlier, good governance, getting groups involved from the beginning, and that co-creation builds committed stakeholders. If an individual stakeholder doesn't want to commit to that process of engaging with you and co-creating, then maybe they're not, your early adopter, maybe they're not your innovator, maybe they're not going to be that direct partner that you really need in the early stage. Potentially they could join later, but really try to identify those that are passionate enough about your project to work with you on all of these things that you need input for. It's gonna be a little bit difficult at times, but it's definitely worth it. So that's pretty much it. Here's how to reach me, and now I'll open it up for questions. Thank you all so much.
Thank you, Kirsten. We have got some questions. Can DLT scale without governance?
No. So there's actually a quote about that by, I believe his name is Stephen Richards. It might be Stephen Rogers. Forgive me if I'm misremembering his name, but he's the vice president of supply chain at IBM. And in a speech that he delivered about a year and a half ago, he said, quote unquote, blockchain systems cannot scale without governance. There was a little bit of a prelude where he elaborated why this is the case. But my answer to that would be no, I don't recommend trying to scale a blockchain system without governance.
Thank you, Kirsten. We've got another question. One participant is asking, I've come across many projects which tend to under-prioritize governance. Why there is a shift to under-prioritize it?
So was that, why is there a shift to under-prioritize it?
I've come across many projects which tend to under-prioritize governance. Why is there a shift to under-prioritize it?
Mm-hmm. So that's the question I ask myself too, and all of us fellow governance wonks ask ourselves. But the real answer is a lot of groups, especially prior to this year, just really didn't know much about governance, especially when we're talking about enterprise use cases. People were like, oh, this is basically a new database technology. Fantastic, we can use this. But it didn't really dawn on them until there started to be a lot of literature coming out on governance, until Deloitte started talking about governance, that this was something that was needed. And this goes back to thinking about blockchains as collectives. A lot of people don't do that. And if you think about blockchains as collectives, then it's just completely apparent to you that governance is necessary in a collective. If you're coming together, you need to have some sort of decision-making process collectively. So if we're looking at very early blockchains like Bitcoin, Ethereum, they have governance. It's just a very rudimentary governance system that's not super applicable for enterprises. So enterprises have to go about, figuring out what is the appropriate governance for their blockchain. And this has led, a lot of groups to creating these consortia, which are very easy ways to have business to business to business to business to business collaboration and governance over a blockchain. So I hope that answered that question.
Thank you, Kirsten. Participants, if you have any questions, you can unmute yourself and ask, or you can share your questions through the chat box. Kirsten, I don't think we have further questions.
Awesome.
Can we wind up the session, or you want something to add?
Oh, no, we can definitely wind up. I know I'm a little bit over. Sorry about that. Thank you all so much for having me. It's been a real pleasure. Hope you guys got a lot out of the discussion. And always remember, blockchains are collectives. Thank you.
Thank you, Ms. Kirsten Pemalis Ranjan. My God, that was a fantabulous session. Joining in from the early hours of the day, the level of dedication that you have shown has been awesome. Looking forward to connecting with you in future endeavors. Take care.
Thank you, Jacob. Bye-bye.
Bye. Dear participants, we have come to the end of today's session. So we've got more exciting sessions coming up tomorrow. 4 Forces in Blockchain Design by Thomas Cox. Then we have the second session, Real Life Implementation in Blockchain by Amy Rajput. And the afternoon session, Leveraging Blockchain for Supply Chain Efficiency by Srikanth Govindilam. So thank you for your participation. See you tomorrow. Stay tuned. Stay safe. Bye.